Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie Bright from Murphy Research, and I am thrilled to be joined by two of the smartest people I know, Sarah Marion and Chuck Murphy. And we are going to chat about the economy. Full disclosure, we are not economists. We know very little about this topic. But what we're really going to talk about is the impact the current economy and particularly inflation could be having on consumer spending. And that particularly, we're going to narrow it down even more in terms of consumer spending related to fitness and nutrition. As you know, we run a syndicated tracker called State of Our Health that tracks consumer behaviors across fitness, nutrition, mindfulness, all sorts of great areas. Been running it since 2018. We've talked to tens of thousands of people at this point. And Sarah Marion runs all of that. I think she probably dreams about these statistics and stats and figures in her sleep at night, probably during her daytime too. Sarah wrote this great newsletter about how inflation is potentially impacting nutrition and fitness spending. And as of Q2 2022, we had not seen any impact. So we wanted to revisit, take a look at what's going on in Q3. These numbers are, we just closed field on Q3. So Sarah is going to give us the first view of the data. And so, Sarah, what are you using as sort of indicators coming out of State of Our Health, and what's happened between Q2 and Q3?
Well, so we measure, we have a couple of ways that we use to look at consumer sentiment, and it is focused on health. But so we measure general population attitudes and barriers to fitness, including money and price. We have a lot of questions where we ask about spending in both fitness and food. And so particularly in food, questions around how important is organic, what percentage of the groceries you purchase are organic, that kind of thing, is a good bellwether in terms of how people are feeling in the pocketbook. And back when I wrote that newsletter, we really had not, inflation had been in the news, it had been headlines for quite a while, but we hadn't seen it affecting our data yet. And in fact, I will tell you that we really still haven't. Money as a barrier is holding pretty steady at around, 16, 17%. And it's been there for a long time. It has risen a little bit since kind of mid-pandemic when money was much less of a barrier. People were getting government stimulus. They weren't going out to dinner or traveling, but only by a couple of percentage points. And so in the newsletter, I had a couple of kind of theories around why that is. I think part of it is that health is important. It became more important during the pandemic. People are willing to spend on wellness in a way that maybe is even more so than they used to be than pre-pandemic. And in a lot of ways, I hear in interviews, people position their wellness spending, their spending on good food, their spending on fitness as healthcare spending, which puts it in a different category than we sometimes think of it. So it makes it more necessary, an expense that you can't really get around, and they'll make adjustments in other areas of their budget to be able to still do what they want to do and buy the food that they want to buy to maintain their picture of how they need to eat and live to be a healthy person.
If you look at Q2 GDP data, which is a phrase I thought I would never say, they're actually spending on healthcare and basically public, private services is up in Q2 compared to the previous quarter, which is kind of a bad quarter. So I don't know. It's all relative, I guess. But I agree with you. I think that people have reframed health in light of the last 2 years of being in a pandemic. And, there's just more of a movement now to be conscious of holistic health, not just one aspect of it, but of all the areas of it. And that requires spending in different ways or, possibly on different things. And so I agree with you. I think there's something about our lives have changed enough that this has become slightly more important to enough people that perhaps it's a little less volatile than it has been in the past in terms of spend.
I saw something. I started, I was just curious what other people had written on this. So I was kind of Googling different articles on like how people think about fitness spend outside of our own sources, because just for curiosity's sake for this, and I found this Style Seat survey. It's from a couple months ago. It's from April, right? So I feel like we could talk more about that, but the pressure is going to change every month. But in April, they basically had people like say, okay, inflation is coming. How are you going to adjust your spending? And it was really interesting that basically a vast majority of people, like 72% of people or something in this survey, said that exactly what you just said, Maggie, that the gym membership falls under wellness, and that's not an area they'll cut. They're willing to trade down to store brands for food. They're willing to cut back on beauty, which I thought was very interesting, especially because it's, I assume these are Style Seat readers. I didn't look too deeply into the methodology of this, but all the other categories, they said that they would cut back, but not fitness and wellness. But then I found another one from July from a different source. I wasn't familiar with this source, and I didn't spend a lot of time vetting it, but they basically said you could see through the summer that there is some evidence of a rotation to outdoor workouts, which now over and above the seasonal. And their hypothesis was like the people that are feeling pressure are going to still get their workouts in, but instead of a treadmill, go outside. Then of course you have the fall. In some places will put pressure back on that, but it's interesting that we don't see that in our data. Because at some point it's physics, right? It's like you could also to wade into the economic waters is you see those credit card balances go up every month. At some point, you're going to have to make that trade off, right? On like things you could cut, and a gym membership is still not in the car or rent or food category of on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right?
Do you think like so what goes away are luxury goods normally, right? Or you trade down to, something that may not be as superior of a product, but still fulfills the need. And so it's like, I think the question becomes, is gym or fitness and health and wellness a luxury item? And I think that's a really pivotal question. And my guess is that if, as we look over time, it's become less of a luxury item and more of a necessity item. So therefore, it may not stay around in exactly the same capacity from a spend perspective, but it's still there. And the great thing about the silver lining, let's say, of COVID is that there's so many more choices about how you can work out now or how you can fulfill nutritional needs, whether it be through online fitness or, different subscription service program, all sorts of ways to do it. So we might see people like jumping around to try different things, but the idea of it going away, I just don't see that happening in the way that it might have, I don't know what the right horizon is, but 10, 20 years ago. I think it's just more of a staple than it was many years ago. And Chuck, I find it funny that they said that cosmetics are going down because we were sort of talking about this yesterday, but there's the lipstick effect. And it's this idea that you still need things that make you happy. You still want to be a consumer in down times. And so you buy things like lipstick that are a little boost. They improve your mood. They give you that, whatever, the serotonin or the dopamine, whatever it is that you get when you consume things. And they also help, with your outward appearance. And so things like that. And I think we were talking about it more as vices than, we were talking about candy, liquor, and cigarettes being immune to this type of thing. But I think that there's still there's a happiness factor that might weigh into this a little bit that's even beyond the economic piece of it. And I can't quantify that, but I get the sense from the things that I've read that exists and that, sometimes fitness and nutrition can fit into that category as well.
It's definitely in this last round of qualitative interviews that we did with consumers. We were interested in this return to the gym. Where does online fitness? So we're talking to people who are gym members and also use online fitness, but none of them were back at the gym as often as they remember being pre-pandemic. And all of them, when we asked, what do you expect in the future? What do you think you would do if we have another terrible COVID wave? And they all felt prepared. They have more options now. So they don't need to go to the gym as often. If the gym closes down, no big deal. I've set up my home space, or I know what apps I'll use there. So for consumers, they have a lot of strategies now that they know will carry them through a tough time. And so if you need to cut down in one area, you can book up some other area that will help you out in terms of fitness. And I suspect the same is true in nutrition. All of the strategies that got you through the pandemic, when you couldn't go out to eat, when you were cooking all the time or cooking for more family members, you can fall back on those. So it's like people feel like they have a cushion. And again, more options, like you said, more strategies. Maybe that means that they don't feel as pressured, perhaps, to change their behaviors just yet.
It's really the office gym connection is always interesting to me, because I do feel like the fact that we've untangled a lot of where things happen. I feel like the gym, like for me, the gym was always tied to the routine of going to work, right? Like I was always a morning person, so I'd go to the gym on the way to the office, bring a change of clothes, and so when the office isn't as strict, which is not true for everyone, but it's true for a large chunk of the population, then the gym routine goes away a little bit, and there's a lot more options that come into that. And I was talking to the person that manages the gym I went to for many years, and I really never go anymore. And there's no good reason for it. I'm still a member, which is dumb, but I should say it's not dumb, but I just don't like. And partly because like my schedule is so different now. It was like it was so tied into like. The question before was like, what am I going to do at the gym tomorrow morning, right? Like I might vary it by day, but the place didn't change. And now it's interesting that like I could, there's so many different places now where I'm like, I could do this or I could do that. And it's almost like once you break that routine or that cycle, that all of the behavior downstream of that changes. Which I think is really fascinating.
I'm actually really curious, Sarah, something that we've talked about a lot, and that I know that has been in reports that we've done, is sort of the difference between how men and women approach a lot of these areas. And I hypothesize that women will probably be the first to start pulling back. I know they tend to spend less in general, and then they tend to feel, I don't know if guilt is the right word, but they're less likely to prioritize their spend on these areas. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we started to see the gap widen between men and women across some of these key areas, and would love your kind of point of view around that area.
Yes. Yeah. So women are always quicker to react to economic kind of trends. They have lower incomes on average. They frequently have larger households. So that makes sense. And they spend less across all of these categories, partly and particularly in fitness, partly because they feel less permission to spend. And so if you feel like your budget is getting tighter, you need to cut back, well, then yes, of course, you're going to cut back right there, especially if you feel like you have less permission to spend there anyway. And so money as a barrier is always higher for women than it is for men. But we still, again, have not seen that change a whole lot yet.
Again, I was just going through all these different data sets. There's so much data online now that you could just find. So I have no idea if the quality of this data is accurate or not. But I was looking at some men-women stuff, and one thing I found that I thought was an interesting hypothesis is that women are quicker to cut. You're right; they do spend less. I agree with everything you just said. But the one little twist I found that I was thinking about was men protect more of the going out food budget, and women will hold on to the gym and the wellness spend longer and cut more in the food categories, especially the out of the house food, which I thought was an interesting. I was thinking about this just in terms of people I know in my own life, and I'm like, you know what, I could see that being true. Like it wasn't a great data source, but I could see that being true. I was like, that's an interesting analysis. Is like where as you start chopping budget away, which categories are you chopping first, and where do you go? And I thought that was an interesting hypothesis that according to this data I was looking at, women will hold that wellness budget longer. They'll cut deeper in other categories to protect that. even though that doesn't disagree with everything you said earlier. It's just a slight kind of tactic change in terms of
Yeah, and we actually see that in State of Our Health too. So at the beginning of the pandemic, and this has lasted, it's continued to, it's still there. Men never stopped going out to eat. And in fact, the small gap in doing that, they made up in outsourcing in other ways. So they never cooked more at home, whereas women shifted almost entirely to cooking at home. So that's where that cut comes from, which is exactly what you said. They also stopped going to the gym, but that was around probably health and safety issues instead. But that makes sense to me, because I do think that part of the reason wellness is such a trend is women drive that trend. And it's because wellness is a solution to healthcare problems that are difficult to address through the healthcare system for them. But also like keeping yourself in a, like looking a certain way and feeling a certain way might be, I don't want to say it's more important, because we know that that's very important for men too, but women are socialized to do that in a different kind of way.
By the way, I can throw other hypotheses out as to why women do that. I'm not going to necessarily say I don't agree with what you just said, but I think that what you just said might be one angle on it. But I would go, I think my first instinct would be more that women are, get in trouble for talking about men and women too.
More capable? Is that where you're going?
No, it's not that. No, I'm
totally kidding.
I know. It's that they're like a little bit more in touch with their bodies. Men, there's a like a part of the way men are taught that, like, it's funny because this runs actually both ways, right? You can make this argument both ways, but in some ways it'll be like, hey, you got to be strong and all that stuff. But they also like do ignore a lot about how their bodies feel physically. It's a part of it's I don't know. You can make the argument whether that's societal, genetic, or whatever it is, but whereas women are a little bit more in tune. I think they make the connection faster that, hey, I feel better. And I it's funny. It's true for everyone. If you work out and you feel better, you're actually more productive later. Like that hour that you spend working out, probably you get back. But I think a lot of people don't make that connection naturally.
I think what we see in the data set would support that to some extent. I don't know like what's causation and correlation, but men are more likely to stick to stricter formal diet plans or have more routine gym. They have more of a routine in how they do it, right? They find
it's very
comfort in that routine.
Right?
Yeah. Whereas women are more likely to have more fluidity around it. And I'm not saying that one approach is better or worse, but I definitely, we see that in our data sets, right? And I don't know, I do think that women become more conscious of body image at a slightly earlier age. And so maybe they have a head start on figuring out the intuitive piece of it. But I agree with you. I do think that there is more of sort of, it's obviously not true all the time, but we see that men are more likely to gravitate toward a structured approach to this, and women have more fluidity in how they do it. And so that could play into this as well.
Yeah. This is a big rabbit hole we could spend a lot of time on, but what you touched on something earlier that I wanted to circle back to, which is another thing that's happening here with and by the way, we're really timely with this podcast because the inflation print this morning just came 40 minutes ago. The Fed just talked, and the stock market is roiled right now because it came in again higher than they expected. But the other thing that I thought was really interesting in some of this spending data, I was just kind of looking through. I was trying to find something really recent, which it's hard to find data for the past month, which is why State of Our Health is so amazing. But the other thing that's happening is that return to office is slowly inching up. We're past 50% now. And especially in bigger cities, it's inching up. And one of the little data nuggets I found out there was that it's caused a little bit of an apparel spend squeeze because people have not bought what you might call work clothes in 2 years. And so now they're kind of having to kind of make up a little bit for lost time and spend a little bit more on wardrobe stuff, which is coming at a bad time. Which I thought was interesting. And you can see that in some of the credit card data that the apparel is going up. So I thought that was an interesting one too, because there's so many things going on right now. This is a really crazy time, but the return to the office, you would think, is a tailwind for the physical gyms, obviously, right? Because you get more people back in that routine. And there's part of me that really misses that routine. I miss going to the gym in the morning because it was like my whole little, there was the same, 25 people that were there at the same time as you every morning. You get to know them, how's work? Like, it's funny. Like, and those are fun workouts. But then at the same time, it's a little bit more like I think what Sarah was talking about in the call, that there is all these other options that people have now got comfortable with because of the pandemic. And so I'm just curious, like, if inflation continues, is that my instinct would be that's a tailwind for the Pelotons and the Apple Fitnesses and YouTubes of the world. And it's probably also a tailwind for the lower end gyms, the Planet Fitnesses of the world, but maybe a headwind for the higher end physical gyms. But I don't know. There's so many things going on. It's hard to figure out like how you would like where your gut lies in terms of what's happening in this category.
I think that makes sense. But I also think people want to, if you're going back to work, you want to look good, right? And if you go into your closet and you realize you haven't bought clothes in 2 years and that the ones that you have don't fit, we've spent a lot of times looking at ourselves on camera for the last 2 years. And I think going back in person, you're like, no one's seen me from from here down. Like I need to keep working out. So I don't know how that piece factors into it. That's the part I can't figure out is it's like, we want to continue to, we've emphasized holistic health. We're going to start seeing people again. Like, where does the gym piece fit into that? And I think, it's funny that you mentioned, you want to get back and see people because, Sarah just finished the online fitness ANU report. And it says that is what men search for in a gym relationship. There's a social component to it, whereas women are less likely to need that. They're more like, I got to get this thing done. I don't really want to lift weights around other people. I like some of the protections of my home. And so I think that's one that I'm really excited to see it play out because I don't have a strong hypothesis on which way it's going to go. I think if an economist would be like, yeah, luxury goes away and the lower stuff stays. But
so Sarah, when Maggie says that, is that your instinct? Because my instinct is absolutely the other way. Women prefer group classes. Women are way more social, and the workout is so. Although I said that, and I am a man, and we could get into the in between, but women.
Yeah, there's two types of socializing going on. Women are more likely to do group classes, and that's what they miss about the gym.
Yeah.
Some of them are fine with a solo workout, but and certainly there's men that do classes as well. But women are more likely to do group fitness classes, and that's what they miss. And I still don't think group fitness classes have come back to the level they were pre-pandemic. Right. And so there's a lot, and even before then, even before the pandemic, there's a lot of limitations, right? If you like to do bar, but they offer the bar class half an hour later than you can't do that class. But now you can do it online. So definitely like online fitness has stolen some of those classes because it's so easy to do what you want when you want. And men are more likely to do these solo gym workouts, and they like having the other men around, especially if they're gym buffs. So like you said, you see the same people every day. It's great. So you have this social experience. You get the workout buddy, you see their arms. Like we had one guy's like, yeah, I see this guy with bigger arms. I go and I ask him. And then he actually had to stop going to the gym because so many people were asking him for advice about how to get his arms.
I have that problem all the time.
Yeah, me too.
Well, it's funny because this has nothing to do with inflation and fitness, but I've actually been fascinated with this for a long time, is that I know many women who will not go to the gym alone. Right. Everything is on a schedule for class. They will not do the thing that men will do. Whereas I have like an averse reaction to that. Like if someone tells me that the workout has to start precisely at 10, it's just it's my own issues. But I'm like, no, what if I want to start at 9:45? Like I can't stand group classes for that reason that I'm on someone else's schedule.
That has nothing to do with fitness.
No, I know it has nothing to do with fitness. But I do think it's an interesting dynamic that it's true how they socialize in different ways. But I do think at a high level, women are much more workouts are much more social.
I agree with that for sure.
Yeah. And I also, The other factor going on there is how much you like somebody else telling you what to do. And women are more likely to want a directed workout. They don't want to have to think about and plan their own workout, whereas men are more confident in their fitness knowledge. A lot of them say, and they're much more likely than women to say, I just prefer to plan my own workout.
And well, some of that is confidence and fitness knowledge, and some of it is just less social beings, right? Like I was talking to somebody about this last week because like we started talking about this this Pilates. This sounds dumb, but this Pilates studio that had got real popular real fast. Well, it's a local thing, and it's funny. I'm debating whether I should even say this, but I guess I'll tell you. She is this instructor is super active on TikTok and basically started making fun of some of her clients, and it's a local thing, so it's pretty easy to like go back and be like, I know who you're talking about here. It's funny, but that was not the point I was going to bring up right now. Look at both of your faces. I'm like, oh, it's kind of juicy. Nicole might come back in for this part of the conversation. She's like, hold on, I haven't thought of here. But what I was going to tell you is I started talking to this guy, and there was a couple other guys there, and we started talking about this dynamic of like that aspect of someone who's really knowledgeable telling you what to do I think is really interesting. I like it. What drives me absolutely crazy is having to make small talk with that person for an hour. And I think that's how a lot of guys are. Like, it's not necessarily an ego thing. It's more just, I now am stuck with this person and hearing about their life for an hour, which I think a lot of women are more patient with that kind of stuff. Whereas that is honestly like, if we had to rank what drives me crazy in life, that is like up there with like the rental car counter person. Like, that is people that just like me being trapped with someone who just is going to make small talk for an hour. Yeah. But so I'd be curious. So Maggie, you answer a little bit, but Sarah, where do you see the tailwinds? Because I am dying to dive into the online fitness data, which we're not going to do today, I know, but it'll be very curious to see like if there's so like to reset, you have 10% year over year cost increases, which is hurting people's budgets, and you can see credit card numbers going up. But at the same time, wages are going up, and there's really not a loss of jobs. There's no evidence of loss of jobs yet. Even you hear anecdotal stories, like none of the big numbers are showing massive changes in employment rates. So it's hard to read. Like the fundamental question is like if a big like gym chain and this would apply to digital first too, like Peloton or Equinox, whoever you're talking about, can they bake in a 10% price increase and basically keep most of their audience? Or is this going to start to hurt soon? Because that's the squeeze, right? Because the wages aren't going down, the cost for everything they're buying is going up.
Yeah, I as you said, I do think that we know that people did a lot of job switching, so they're making more money than they were before, and people are in better jobs than they were before. The economy is really weird right now. There's things that look really good. There's things that look really bad. Even what you were saying about having to buy clothes to go back to the office. There's also these headlines about retailers have this glut of inventory. So at least you get to go buy the clothes on sale, right?
It's funny. I think you're starting to see that. This weekend, I got an email from I'm not going to name names, but a reseller I really like, and everything was 70% off for the weekend. And I'm like, yeah, let's load up. 70% off. So I think I do wonder how much of that we're going to see. According to the experts, we're going to see a lot of that over the next couple months.
So in some ways, it's like good to be a consumer right now.
Yeah. And by the way, for those of you that don't know, my last comment, we just did this study that we do every year on online fitness, deep dive into spend and all that. So that's when is that coming out? Is that like a month from now?
So the report will be out tomorrow.
Tomorrow? Oh, wow. Oh, look at this. I didn't even know. Wow. Okay, I'm behind on this. So that one, I'm dying to dive into that one because I also, too, I could do a whole nother half hour right now on, I've talked to so many people about, specifically Peloton a lot, but things like Peloton Tonal. And it's fascinating because I'm always fascinated when there's some behaviors that change for very clear reasons, right? I used to go to the gym on the way to the office. I don't go to the office anymore. It broke the gym behavior. However, I still drive by that gym all the time, and I easily could integrate it into my schedule, but it's for whatever reason, I'm having trouble. And you see the same thing happening with these people that had this routine with things like Peloton, and that chain has been broken now. And it's interesting to see how that settles out. And it's funny to talk to, like, you'll talk to people that are like, I love it. It's a lot like the physical gym, right? I love it. I want it to be part of my life. I am not making the space for it that I once was a year ago for reasons I can't really explain, right? You'll hear people say things like that over and over.
Well, I think like Sarah and I were actually talking about this. The back to school time frame this year has been more insane than usual. And I don't know if that's because we lost all of our stamina for this type of thing over the last 2 years, or if it's like it's the first sort of quote unquote normal return to school that we've had in a few years. But it has been intense. And, I don't know, maybe it's just me. I don't manage my time well, but it's been really hard to fit in workouts. I mean, I got on my Peloton this morning for the first time in probably a month. And I was like, oh, I remember why I love this. But like, it's dusty, like it's sad. But I think too, like this is normally a time when we would see people fall off perhaps a little bit because of all of this craziness. We're going into the holiday season. So it's a weird time to judge how inflation is impacting it, because normally we would start, there is a seasonal pullback to some extent. And like the better time to look at it would be in April, when people are gearing up to get back in shape for the summer, or, whatever we're going to call that now. Because it's a weird time.
I would actually argue the opposite.
Oh.
In the fall, we frequently see a pickup in health engagement. And it was very pronounced though during the pandemic, and has been much like the opposite has happened this fall. And I do think that it's because, things have been much busier. So my little anecdote is my kids went back to school last year, but it was masks. We couldn't go in the school. There were no extracurriculars. Whereas now there's a lot more activity around the school. There's things happening before and after school. So it's much busier, even though kind of on the surface, the same things happened. So if you combine that with maybe going back to the office more often, maybe now you're so for instance, my husband, they said, last spring, they said, you have to come back 50% of the time, and nobody did. And so in the fall now they're saying, now we really are going to come back at 50% of the time. And so people are really having to go back in a way that they were before. So I do think that things have gotten a lot busier. And so unlike previous years, where in August and September, we see a little bump as people go back to school, as people get back into regular kind of real life routines back from the summer, that hasn't happened. And instead, fitness in particular has fallen off significantly since the summertime, since Q2. Nutrition has not.
Well, and it's crazy. It's like anything else, right? You stop doing it and you lose the muscles. And I've talked to so many people. I'm specifically talking about parents with kids, but I've talked to so many parents with kids who are just overwhelmed with this year's back to school. And I think it's exactly what you said, Sarah. It's all the activities. Like we really didn't fully go back. And it's crazy. From all indications, it looks like we're 2, 3, 4 weeks away from another massive COVID spike. So then we're gonna go back. So it's like there's just so much choppiness and so much, and I think that kind of stresses people out and it breaks all their routines again. Then it's like, oh, now we're gonna go back. Are we? I had to go to the thing last night at the school where all the parents huddled together and talked through all the scenarios and issues for the year. And it's like, we didn't have to do that for the last 2 or 3 years. And it's like, now we have to do it for like every class. And then you add sports and meetings and it's a lot. It's a lot of,
and then the return of just regular things. You haven't seen a concert for 2 years. You want to see all the concerts now. You want to go to the sporting events. So that adds up. And all of a sudden, you wonder like, why did I have all this time to exercise every day last winter? And that's why. It's because you didn't have anything else to do.
Yeah. And then you get into the habit, you get into the routine. And it's funny, like a hybrid, I don't know exactly what your husband's schedule is, but the hybrid schedule in some ways makes it even harder for the routine, right? If you're fully remote, then you get into the kind of, at home routine, and if you're, fully in the office, you get into the gym routine. But now it's like, I'm going in this day and not this. There's a lot to figure out that I don't think people have their rhythm or their cadence figured out yet, where it's just routine.
I think from a financial perspective, and Sarah would know this much better than I would, but the idea, or what I seem to keep seeing is that there's a committed group of consumers who are over-indexing on spend and engagement with fitness, nutrition, mindfulness, all of these things, and they will be somewhat undeterred by financial stresses in their life. They will prioritize this over other things and will make whatever trade-offs they need to make. And I mean, my guess would be that's like a third of the people we talk to at any given time who are somewhat engaged in fitness and nutrition. There's this group of a third that are like, I'm in this no matter what. This is part of my life. It is a necessity. It's a staple. It's the other 2/3 that I think will be interesting to watch, in that, do they continue to be engaged in the category, but to a lesser extent? Do people fall out of the category, which it looks like we're already seeing that from a fitness perspective. And by category, I mean just sort of engagement with these areas, regardless of what the actual behavior or spend is. And does that get exacerbated among certain subgroups more so than others? Like, it would stand to reason that people with lower incomes might be more affected by this than those with higher incomes, or, are men and women going to behave differently in these set of scenarios? And so I think that third remains like a very safe, like, yes, I'm going to keep the Peloton. I will weather that 10, and I'm saying I as those third, I will weather that 10% increase because it's important to me. And in the grand scheme of things, the extra $4 per month is worth my spend. But I think it's the other 2/3 that are particularly or potentially vulnerable once the time stops being a barrier. Will finances become a barrier? And I think that's the interesting thing to watch. And I mean, I think it's also really uncertain right now what's going to happen next. I mean, like y'all said, there's so many conflicting indicators right now, and it's kind of like, well, what do we do with this? I listened to this podcast yesterday, and it was going through like, both stocks and bonds are down. That's weird. And at the end of the podcast, the best correlation they found was the whatever music is at the top, is like the chart topper, is the best indicator of what's going on with the economy. So if it's a happy song, then we're in a recession. And if it sets a sad song, we're not in a recession. But the one that was at the top when they did, when they produced this, was like, they couldn't tell if it was happy or sad because it had elements of both. And so what are we in? And it's like, that sums it up for me,
That sounds like the way I bet on horse races. Do I like this name? No.
Yeah, I was going to say that may not be the best way to
wait, let me guess. I wrote down the songs for the last couple of recessions because I thought it was really funny.
So I was going to say, do you remember what was the chart topper in 2007?
Yes. So 2008.
Okay.
It was Beyonce, All the Single Ladies.
All the Single. That's a happy song, right?
Yes, we were in a recession. Happy song. 1982.
Oh, the other way. You're saying if we're in a recession,
it's a
happy music.
We want something happy to look forward to, so it's happy songs.
Look at the 90s and the Smiths and the Cure. We're saying that was clearly a good economy when the music is okay.
Yes.
Okay,
so 1982, when they were the last major, there were 2 recessions in the 80s. So this I think is the second.
Call Me by Blondie. Blue Jean by David Bowie.
Olivia Newton-John. Let's get physical.
Oh, okay. Hey, that should be our theme song for this podcast, by the way.
It should. But it's kind of funny. I'm like, and it's so the one right now, and this is going to show my age because I don't know. It's so the one that was the chart topper was a Harry Styles song, and I am totally blanking on the name of it, but it has the lyrics are sad, but there's a poppy beat to it.
I don't think there's a sad Harry Styles song, right? I mean, Harry Styles' whole thing.
According to these economists, it's sad and happy.
Economists as arbiters of pop music.
I think when you see government stepping in to bail out pension funds, you should just assume that something bad's about to happen, right?
Well, yeah.
I think the easy mark here is this can't be good. I know a lot of smart people that are like, no, this is a slow moving train, but it's crashing. Okay.
Yeah. Well, and there might be a train strike to add on to that. So then that'll make things even worse.
I know.
I also wonder if, as a millennial, there have been a lot of once in a lifetime terrible economic things that have happened all in my adult lifetime. And they have not, I don't feel like they have ever affected my spending very much, because that's just been the nature of the economy for me. And I wonder if there's some generational things.
I will say, okay, this is the last thing I'm going to say, and it has nothing to do with inflation or fitness, really. But in terms of millennials, this is a generational buying opportunity, right? You have this is what Warren Buffett looks for, is like, oh my God, stocks are cheap, everybody's panicking, and that in 2008 or whatever, it was buying Apple and Netflix and super cheap, and now there's going to be a lot of good deals that 5 years from now you're going to be like, that was my opportunity.
I have to tell you, it's raining in DC. I walked my dog this morning. I grabbed a raincoat. Haven't worn one in a while. I put it on, and it was a giveaway from Lehman Brothers, which I thought was hilarious, given that we were talking about inflation and all of these things. I was like, how funny is that? And then I was like, oh, 2008 was rough.
That's how old we are, right? That you have swag from the last crisis
that I still wear.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great raincoat. I mean, they not so great at bonds, great at raincoats. Anyway.
Yeah. All right. Well, this was super fun. And I'm excited. The online fitness report is coming out tomorrow, which means we could dive. That's one of my favorite. I think that might be my favorite report day of the year. No offense to any of our wonderful clients, but
it's a good one. It's a really good one.
Yeah, I hope that I live up to your expectations.
You did. I took a sneak peek. It's a good one.
Okay.
Oh, you already saw it? Oh, wow, you're ahead of me.
Of course I did. Come on, I have an inside source.
It went down a little bit last year, but then went up again this year. And I really think that people are just, their lives are so different, and they're having trouble, not having trouble, but there's a lot of experimentation going on.
Yeah, it hasn't found. You always want to be part of a habit or a routine, right? Think about smartphones, right? We spent 4 years trying to figure out what these things were going to do in our lives. And then the last 10 years, they've basically done the same thing slightly incrementally better every year. Like you know what I mean? And you figured out what they do, what they don't do. And I think that's how it's going to be for a lot of this stuff, is like, what's the habit that this will hold on to for long term?
Yeah. And it's also, I mean, this has been obvious now from these state of our health reports for a long time. People's lives change dramatically over the last 2 years. We think of it as this big pause, but if you interview anybody, they will tell you how dramatically their life changed. So there's nothing that is the same kind of on a individual personal level for most people, as they're just totally different than they were in 2019. And so they're still trying to figure out what that means as everything else comes back online and returns to whatever normal means now.
If only there was a data source that you could follow all these changes.
You could see how it works out from year to year and month to month.
Oh my goodness. Do you know something?
Folks,
like
there is.
It's like a gold mine in my own computer.
It's amazing. With tens of thousands of completes at your fingertips.
It could be yours. It's a great value.
It is a great value.
It's called State of Our Health. Let's put the name in.
Yes. And it's, you can, it'll help you get through these inflationary times. Really good spend.
Good value. Good value.
Good value. Thank you.
100%.
Thank you, guys. I know I was supposed to moderate and I let us get off the rails. But I think this was really fun, and I love talking to y'all. And hopefully we can come back maybe in early Q1 and see if any of these major indicators have moved around, and, kind of what's at play still. So thanks.
Yeah. All right. Have a good day, guys.